Hello, my name is Reverend Mace Hall, and I'm here on behalf of the One Lamb Mental Wellness Initiative at Peachtree Road. And it is one of my honors and privileges to get to talk to and interview people who are either dealing with a mental health challenge or clinicians in that space and find out in detail in a personal way what they do and why they do it. I always start these interviews and say, mental health is like any other kind of health. You need to take care of it. We all experience a vast array of emotions that can come out of the blue or come from something in our past. And we are lucky enough to have physicians and clinicians who will help us, whether it's a physical sickness or mental sickness, so that we get better and can live purposeful and meaningful lives. Today, I have a great privilege of interviewing Dr. Stan Sonu. Stan is a professor at Emory University Medical School, and he also runs a practice out of Hughes Spalding at Grady. And so, Stan, we are thrilled to have you and to learn from you. And at first, so the audience knows, Stan sent me his bio, and it was so long, I couldn't get over all the things you've done. It's impressive and remarkable and says so much about your priorities. So can you kind of highlight how you got to where you are? Because I know you didn't go to medical school thinking, I'm going to be a childhood trauma specialist.
Oh, no. Sure, yes. Well, if I could, extrapolate some of the high-level points in my journey, I've always wanted to be in medicine. I've always wanted to be, ever since I was a young child, I remember wanting to be a physician or wanting to be in a profession where I could help people. And somewhere in college, high school, college is where that rather undifferentiated passion to help people became a little bit more clear in going to medicine. I think I had this desire to do the hardest thing I could, or to be in a field where I'd have to use the best of my abilities and brain power to do well. And so that was medical school. And
at MCG, right?
At MCG, Medical College of Georgia down in Augusta, which we call ourselves McGeers. I don't know if that joke is still relevant, but in medical school, I knew I wanted to be in pediatrics and was kind of single-minded to that end. And then in my third year of medical school, when I entered my clerkship, so that's the phase in our training where we enter into the hospital and go through different rotations. I was really struck by internal medicine and fell in love with that field. And so it raised the question, how do I bring these two fields together, pediatrics and internal medicine? And I was fortunate to find there's a field called Med-Peds.
And where were you doing this?
I ended up doing that in Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And during that period, in my residency training, my mission, my primary goal was to be the best clinician I could be, whether it was in primary care or in the hospital. And I didn't really have much of an interest in research. I just wanted to be a good doctor and really devoted my time, my effort, my energy to being the best resident physician I could be and learning the most. And I would say, in general, it was, for the most part, or in a lot of ways, it was rewarding. But I also couldn't help realize I was becoming increasingly disillusioned as my residency went on. And the odd thing about this period of disillusionment was I didn't know what the reason was for it. I just knew that something felt really dissatisfying, unfulfilling. I was seeing many patients in different rotations in the hospital, and I felt like my understanding of the medicine and what to do was developing and evolving well, but very few people were coming back to me after we had been successful in addressing whatever issue they had. Very few people were coming back to me saying, I'm thriving. my life, I'm flourishing. I feel like things are a lot better now. And it almost felt like what was more common was after we had taken care of one medical or physical health problem, then another one kind of took its place. And so I had this kind of dull ache of disillusionment that I didn't know where it was coming from until sometimes I think it's serendipitous, sometimes I think it was kind of an ordained moment, but until I ended up in a lecture on adverse childhood experiences, something I never heard before in all of my residency in medical school. And when I took in what the lecturer was saying, I just had a flood of so many mixed emotions, but I knew that there was a seed that was planted, like this was going to change my career. And I wasn't sure how or in what way at the time. All I knew was this was a space that I had to be in, because this study, this topic felt so important, and it was something that very few of us on the healthcare side had any exposure to.
It sounds like a calling.
Yeah. I know when we've had lunch, Mace, you've called that out, and I actually thought about that a lot. And I do think, I guess I'm in a phase in my life where I'm ready to embrace that designation. Because I think when I look back on my journey to this point, all these doors that have opened, the opportunities that I've been given to share, and the feedback, and especially the way that this topic relates to the faith community and the ramifications or the implications of this topic in a faith community with respect to our healing and our flourishing and recognizing who we are as created in the image of God. All that has been an incredible journey, but one that, when I look back, I can definitely affirm, or I feel a sense of affirmation that this is what I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to do.
This is your meaning, your purpose.
Yeah.
I want to get back to your faith, but I want to get back. So you went to the lecture in Chicago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you had that Holy Spirit nudge moment where you're like, okay, this is going to give me more fulfillment. I can do more with this. So what did you do then?
Well, the way you're describing it is accurate. I will say, in the lecture, I was so struck by what the lecturer was saying that my first emotion was actually anger. It was a mix of awe and wow, but there was a lot of anger, and I was really frustrated. I was exasperated that I had studied so hard in medical school. I'd been so diligent, or I felt like I had been so diligent as a learner, only to be 3 months away from finishing residency and then stumbling across, again, serendipitously or in kind of an ordained moment, this study that was so monumental. It was a landmark study in the public health world, and I couldn't understand why it wasn't a landmark study in my world in healthcare at the same time. And so, it went from anger, and that anger, part of that anger led me to want to disprove it. So I got home and I started reading everything I could about the adverse childhood experience study to find holes in its methodology and to
Can you
nitpick.
just give a brief summary of what that study said?
Oh, sure. So this was a study that was a joint effort by the CDC here in Atlanta and Kaiser Permanente in San Diego. And what these researchers did was they surveyed a total, in the end, of a little over 17,000 adults and they asked these adults about 10 different categories or types of adverse experiences that these adults might have experienced growing up, from birth to the age of 18. And these adverse childhood experiences, or what we call ACEs for short, included things like abuse, so physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. They also asked about different kinds of neglect, physical or emotional neglect. And then they asked about different kinds of stressors, like 5 different stressors that a child could experience in the home environment growing up. So these included things like mental health problems, substance use disorders in a household member, an incarcerated household member, intimate partner violence against the mother, and then lastly, parental separation, death, and divorce. And so this study, which ran for, I would say, between 10 and 15 years formally, led to a number of very insightful discoveries. And the first one was, to their surprise, the realization that these ACEs, these 10 ACEs, were actually more common than they were not. And so the people who were included in this study were not a sample, they were not a participant sample that people would stereotypically label as high risk. These were middle-class Americans who were all insured. 75% of them had gone to college or obtained a higher degree. They were mostly middle-aged, and then 75% of the demographic were white. I think, if my memory serves me correctly, 11% were Hispanic, 9% were Asian, 6% were Black. So this was not a group that these researchers anticipated having a high prevalence of trauma or ACEs, but that's exactly what they saw. So almost 2 out of every 3rd person in this study had 1 ACE or more, and about 1 in 8 of these adults had 4 ACEs or more, which is really high. It's a really high number of adversities when you step back and think about it. And these are things that we don't talk about. There's no institution in our society except maybe therapy and counseling on a one-on-one level where you can talk about these things routinely. So that was the first main finding, that ACEs are common. And so they're kind of like these invisible wounds that we carry, and we may or may not be aware that they're still there. There's kind of a thin layer of scar tissue over some of these. The second finding is what really drew me into this space, and it was that when they took the number of ACEs that each person had, what they saw was that the more ACEs a person had, the higher risk they would be for a multitude of undesired health problems. And it ranged from substance use or other kind of risky lifestyle behaviors to mental health problems, depression, anxiety, PTSD. And those first 2 categories, most people are not surprised to understand that there's a relationship between a difficult childhood and substance use or mental health problems. But then they extended their question to physical health problems, like specifically chronic diseases. And there they saw this very strong signal where the more ACEs a person had, the higher risk they would be for things like diabetes and heart disease and different types of cancer even, or autoimmune disease, liver disease, joint pain, obesity. I mean, the list is pretty, it's impressively and tragically very long. And as a primary care doc for adults at the time, when I saw, my gosh, that so many, the upstream from so many of these health conditions could be these experiences of adversity or potentially traumatic events, that I had no vocabulary, I had no conceptual approach to addressing the impact of these things with my patients. And so that's what I tried to disprove. That's what I was trying to read
and
about.
How'd that go?
I failed miserably because, as it turns out, essentially in every research study on ACEs, when they've just looked at the number, the prevalence of ACEs in a given community, and then they asked the question, is there a link between the number of ACEs and health problems, health outcomes? It's been yes in every single study, and this has been done in nearly every country of the world, rural, urban, every race, ethnicity is represented. There is no part of humanity that has not been touched by trauma and adversity, and there's no part of humanity that has escaped the consequences of unmitigated adversity in childhood.
So you're doing your residency, you discovered this, you tried to disprove it, and you went on and did some additional research and education, right?
Mm-hmm. So after I attended this lecture, I was going to graduate in 3 months, but fortunately I was actually headed into a chief residency year, which is kind of a glorified administrative year with lots of teaching and mentorship. And it's a 1-year term, so I knew I had some time to reevaluate things and consider what I wanted to do with this. And as it turned out, there was right across the street at Cook County, which is the public safety net hospital in Chicago. It's equivalent to Grady in many ways. At Cook County, there was a fellowship in preventive medicine and public health. And when I reached out to the program director and said, "Hey, this is I'm very interested in training here, and also kind of pushing into research. I'm a newbie, but I'd like to push into some research around this topic of ACEs." They were all for it, and so I spent 2 years there. And as part of that program, I went and got an MPH, a Master's in Public Health at Northwestern. And it was those 2 years that really solidified my interest, my passion in this topic, and I acquired some research skills and sharpened my ability to, understand the research and understand some basic biostats and epidemiology so that I could understand these papers more thoroughly. And that was, I finished that program in 2018 and then found a job at Grady by way of Emory, and moved back in the summer of 2018 to start my job. Yeah. So,
I love the science, and it's impressive. But I was really struck when we had lunch together that there's a personal side to this for you.
Very.
You are Korean and you're American.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you feel comfortable sharing some of that?
Oh, sure. And thank you for asking. I think my interest and enthusiasm for this topic is absolutely informed by my own experience. And my parents immigrated from Seoul and South Korea in the early 80s, and I was born in the mid 80s. I know I look like I'm 23, Mace, but your boy is almost. I'm over 40. I used to
You're
say
not
almost
over 40.
I'm over 40.
Thank you for that lie.
But I'm accepting the feedback about my youthful glow these days. But my parents immigrated in the early 80s, and they moved here with the intention of providing some stability to the family and opportunities. But they had no idea what kind of cultural dynamics they would encounter. They never experienced things like racism for being Asian in Korea, right? Understandably. And so for me, growing up, I was an only child for the first 10 years. There was a language barrier at home. There was a cultural barrier at home where my parents didn't understand what it was like to go to be a first grader in a school in America in the South, and the challenges that would come with that. They were loving and supportive in so many ways, but the language barrier plus the cultural barrier plus them having to work long hours most days of the week kind of collectively shaped my childhood in such a way where I was used to not feeling understood. I was used to keeping my emotions, especially the distressing ones, just pushed down to the floor. I was used to feeling good about myself through achievement. that was a narrative that I inherited, I think, culturally from Korea, but then it got emphasized and accelerated here.
Is a racial, a racial bias that Asian people are smarter than white people, and may be true. But it is a pressure that is, whether even though people consider it positive, it's also a pressure.
Oh yeah, and that's a separate conversation, Mace. That we could. That's another
next lunch.
That's a deep conversation there for all the reasons for that. But
Let me ask you though: did you experience racism?
I did in a kind of low grade way, but also there were these moments of kind of overt racism. So one story that I've shared before was somewhere around first or second grade. I remember being on the school bus on the way home. And at that time, one of those martial arts movies was out, whether it's Karate Kid or, I don't know, Surf Ninjas. Like, one of those movies was out, and so the kids on the bus were doing different karate moves, and then I just was kind of keeping to myself watching them, and then their gaze fell on me, and then it was, from that point on, it was, hey, you're Asian or you're Chinese, and they started doing like whooping in different ways and gesturing. And then I remember one of the kids said, you should know this because you're a chink. And that was the first time I had heard that word before. But the way that all the other kids kind of snickered and laughed, I knew it wasn't good. So I went home, not really sure how to feel, but I was unsettled. And when my dad came home, I asked him, what does chink mean? And he knew it was a derogatory term. And I remember what his reaction was. Well, actually wasn't one of, this is what this word means, and this is how you should respond to it. He said, if they ever touch you again, hit them in the mouth. And I think as a child, I walked away from that conversation thinking, okay, I guess I can hit someone now if they choose to do that again, which, looking back, wasn't what I needed in that moment. I mean, what I needed was him or my mom to speak into me. You are not a chink like this. You are our son. You are Korean and you live in America. You are like wonderful just the way you are.
You're worthy and you're important.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, though. Yeah. I know you said your parents worked a lot and that you weren't necessarily getting the needs you needed, emotional needs. Do you feel at all that one of your ACEs was neglect?
I would say, yeah. Emotional neglect was probably the most significant of ACEs I experienced.
I have this opinion that emotional neglect, this is just me speaking, but I believe emotional neglect is more damaging than physical abuse, because physical abuse actually acknowledge that you're human and that you can cause a reaction and an emotion, and neglect is, I don't see you.
Oh, you're, excuse me. You're absolutely right. There's research on this very question as well. Not that trauma is ever a competition, but there is something particularly severe and damaging about emotional neglect. And you're right, with physical abuse we experienced as a child, we can grow up and look back on it, because I was spanked as well. And we can look back on if the spanking veered into something more severe, or if it was abusive in nature. We can say, I was a child, I didn't deserve to be hit like that. So we can ground our distress about it to an experience, to say this should never have happened. But with emotional neglect, we're talking about a problem that is defined by an absence of something that we needed. it's much harder to ground in an experience. It's a vague feeling, and it feels a lot like, it feels very close to shame, at least in my experience, the feeling of emotional neglect. Because I think the messaging is for the person experiencing it is, you're not worthy, you're unlovable, or you're not likable, whatever synonym we have for it.
I don't have time for you.
I don't have time for you. I'm too busy for you, or you're not enough for X, Y, Z reason. And you know what we say as adults when we've experienced emotional neglect? We don't say, oh, my mom or dad should have done this. They should have been this for me. Actually, our first reaction typically is, oh, my parents did the best they could. So our first vocalization around that topic tends to be defending the family. And that is actually how many people who've experienced emotional neglect learn to cope. You make sense of it as a child to say, well, the reason my parents don't understand me is because they're working 7 days a week. And why are they working 7 days a week? Because they have to provide for our family. So they're actually sacrificing to work. And therefore, how can I as a child dare to say anything about what they're doing when they're doing it for the family? And that may be true, right? The parents may have to work that hard and do, sacrifice in any number of ways to provide for the family. But it's also equally true that children have not just physical needs, but mental, emotional, and spiritual needs. And just because there is a need for sacrifice doesn't mean that this other need in children is invalid or goes away.
Let me ask you this question. And do you think that part of your parents, now the 7 days a week is, yes, that is, a lot of people live that way, and it's unfortunate. But even if you live that way, you can still have a warm and open and loving. Do you think that came from their culture, and or do you think that's just the way they were wired, or the way their family of origin was, or I mean, you don't come into the world not wanting warmth.
Right. I think it was, at least for my family, a mix of all of that. My parents were never, I wouldn't characterize them as mean people. They were always real kind and approachable, just not available. And my dad certainly not emotionally available. I think the cultural dimensions of it make me think about when I was a baby, when I'd just been born. I was actually born in rural Illinois, in northern Illinois. And my mom was 24 years old when I was born, estranged from her mother in Korea, and raised me alone as someone in her mid-20s. I had no help, never, she was never a babysitter or never worked with children before, so she raised me on her own and relied on people's advice, people she didn't know very well, to give her advice. And one of the things that she was told and she did was, don't hold your son, because boys who are held end up being spoiled and girly. So you have to not hold him so he doesn't develop that way. So I think when I was, I just entered into being a toddler, she stopped holding me. And so that there was the physical connection broke, and we've talked about that and have worked through that. But even to this day, I have to prompt myself to hug my mom when with my wife or my children. It's very natural. It's kind of a part of our dynamic. With my mother, I have to be very intentional about that connection.
And that's what the next thing I want to talk to you about. So you've done all this amazing work, and quite frankly, I think everybody who has a child needs to understand this because we do all come from backgrounds. And I was spanked as a child. I mean, I'm from Middle Georgia. Lordy, we went outside and had to pick our own switch and take all the little branches off of it. I mean, it's insane. Yeah. But I mean, how has this changed the way you approach your marriage and your parenting?
Oh, profoundly. And I think, back to your earlier question, what really hooked me into this space, yes, there were some profound lessons and insights around patient care and how the practice of the art of medicine that was, I found very moving. But what really made this topic a necessity for me to learn more about was when I applied it to my own life and started to see things in my life started to be revealed or uncovered. And then as I started to do some work around that, I saw fruit in ways that I had never seen before. And right around the time I was learning about all this, our son Elliot had just been born, so he was a baby. And I remember he must have been 7 or 8 months, and Eileen had gone out of town on a girls' trip. My wife had gone out of town on a girls' trip, and it was me and Elliot, and he had just started to learn. He was beginning to learn how to crawl, and so he was more mobile around our apartment, and started playing with this closet door, ones that kind of look like an accordion, and it had a tendency to kind of get off the latch and tip over. And so I saw him playing with it, and I didn't want it to fall on him, so I told him not to. And as a baby, of course, being curious, he went right back to it after I moved him. So after the third time he went back to it, it just did something to me, and I just exploded on him. And afterwards, I felt this really strong ache of shame. What did I do? Why would how could a 7-month-old make a grown man that angry? Like something was amiss there. There's some wires that are not connected the right way. But now I had some language. I had some conceptual language to interrogate what happened. And as I learned about trauma, and as I learned about how it affects brain development, how it can kind of hijack our stress response systems, how it really capitalizes on our agency and our ability to show up as ourselves, how trauma makes us be more reactive than responsive or reflective. I could see, there's something about disobedience that's not okay. That when I see it sends alarm signals in me. And long story short, I was just following the breadcrumbs back, and I realized as a child, I was really afraid to be disobedient. I was that quintessential first son of the prodigal son story. I'm the one who followed the rules and got rewarded for it. And so to see my 7-month-old disobey or be disobedient to his father activated the same nerve that I had felt as a child. And so being able to put those pieces together and like connect those threads helped me to, number one, have some grace for myself that this was a reaction, but this is not an expression of who I am. It's not an expression of my values. Number two, it helped me to want to repair with my son. And then third, it made me realize like it put into context his behavior as well. And so the next time we were in a situation like that, I don't even remember what it was, but I know that I didn't have that same strong reaction again, that there was an extra moment of, oh, here it comes again. Like, I'm starting to feel that angst, the anger in me rise again. But you know what? It's not about him. He's not doing anything personal to me, of course. And then if you can kind of sit with this for a little bit longer, you might you might get some clarity on where this is coming from, and then not do something that you'll later regret. So
The reason you don't remember is you did it right the next time.
I think so. I think the next time he did something right, I think I had a bit more. My container to be flexible was greater, was larger, and I was able to respond instead of be reactive. So that's in my relationship as a father to my son. But I have other stories of in my marriage how this played out as well. And every couple have those arguments that always come up. They're kind of themes throughout the relationship. We certainly had ours, and learning about ACEs and trauma and everything that the whole ecosystem of knowledge with it helped me to re-examine what those conflicts were, and what my wife and I didn't realize was how much the origin of these conflicts actually wasn't from the point of our relationship or our dating history. It stemmed from both of our childhoods individually. And so once we kind of brought that to the surface, what happened next was, in the heat of another argument, one of us would just catch a glimpse of the child that was wounded and hidden behind like the monster that was facing the other monster and the other person, and just catching that glimpse of the wounded child. It wasn't always me or it wasn't always her. It just kind of circumstantially, one of us would just notice, that you're behind your anger, behind your frustration is hurt, is woundedness. And I didn't cause that wound, but I'm aggravating it right now by my own defensiveness. And so, long story short, I know I'm being more vague here, but long story short, we that the way that we argued or had difficult conversations changed and became more grace-filled. And so then I just started seeing fruit from our marriage as well. So at that point, when I started seeing the change in my life, and I was just entering into the space, that's when I was sold on it to say, like, this is not, healing doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't need to require some external substance that we take. It's not a magical program, but we already have the tools that we need to heal, to be whole again, and we're just missing it as a society. It's escaped us, and so we have to talk about it more. We have to bring it to light. Yes, it can be scary. It's difficult. It's a journey, but it's real. And so from then on, I knew I was going to be doing this work.
Well, I want to close with this because I think the way you and I ended up getting to know each other is because you realized I'm a minister and you are a very active person of faith. Mm. And can you just, I'm sure it's faith is so complicated as well as emotions, but how have you integrated your faith into your scientific work and your practice?
Oh, that's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind for me is, as I was in my journey of reading and doing my own research, really exploring this topic, all sides of it, I realized how much the science was actually kind of reflecting God's heart. And the science was catching up, you could say, to God's story of redemption and his love for his people. And it just kept coming up over and over again, to the point where I started to say in some faith circles when I would present, when we're trauma informed and we then show up and interact with others being trauma informed, really what we're talking about is a scientific rationale for grace. Grace is not something that science invented. Grace is part of God's character. And so it was a kind of one aha moment after the other of realizing oh my goodness, what we need to heal, which requires a big part of healing is community. That's already talked about and reflected in God's character and what he desires for his people. And so interestingly, I think I was at a point in my faith journey too, around that time where I was kind of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, not sure about how my life as a Christian would unfold, but learning about trauma actually brought me back into the church in some pretty intentional ways. Because when you read the literature on what it takes to heal, yes, therapy and counseling and processing trauma is a big part of it, but you cannot heal in the absence of community. There is no such thing as healing and becoming whole again. There's no such thing as integration without others. And for me, the church, I have a complicated relationship with the church as a Christian, I think as many people who've grown up in the church do, but I have tasted and experienced the most beautiful of communities in faith settings. And what I mean by that is I've been in communities, in groups where I've been able to show up as myself, with my walls down, as my authentic self as much as I can be, and there's such a safety in that. So all to say, this topic of trauma and ACEs, absolutely, it intersects with our faith journeys, not just in the practical aspects of healing, but even I think theologically in terms of how we view sin too. Mm-hmm. So there's just so many ways that it relates, that trauma and what we learn about trauma relates to how we live out our faith. That, yeah, these days I'm really interested in faith communities engaging with this. And I'll say the times that I've presented and shared with different faith communities, really of all races and ethnicities, different denominations, it is incredible how much it's just so apparent to me there's such a strong desire for people to be known and seen and have a sense of belonging as they're known and seen. It's a universal need. And I remember I spoke at a church that the community they knew each other really well. They were very tight. They'd been a cohesive congregation for decades. And I talked about the ACE study and talked about the different numbers of ACEs. And one of our discussion questions was, how does this resonate with you? And what was incredible is that people who had known each other for 20 and 30 and 40 years were talking about these things and were saying to each other, I've known you since you were this big, and I never knew this was in your family. I never knew that you had gone through this. And so in that sharing and acceptance and in the safety of that group, you could it was palpable, this sense of connection and acceptance and belonging. I think that's what can happen when we have opportunities to talk about these things that are inside us and need to be witnessed and need to be seen and worked through.
That's awesome. And I'm gonna say that is one of the major goals of the One Lamb initiative, is that we aren't ashamed of our past, and we're not. We all have experienced something, but we need to be able to be our authentic selves, especially in our place of faith. So thank you so much, Dr. Sonu. I appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you.
Stan Sonu has taken groundbreaking scientific research and been able to cull it into a career, into his teaching, into his family life, and into his faith. That's the beautiful blend of taking the wholeness of the scientific world and the created world and using our brains and our hearts and the grace that God has given us so that we can come to this place with our community and beyond, being authentically ourselves and therefore healing in the process. Thank you.